Hello. An interesting video today. Last week we had a video about chimp and human DNA. There was a part of that video where I very briefly talked about where this 99% similarity came from. Now, I didn't go into much detail, so I think a lot of people may not have understood it. Then I found this video here which perfectly allows us to talk about it, so I decided this would be a good opportunity. As usual, this is a creationist video and he tries to make the argument that humans and chimps are not so similar after all. Let's have a look.
The idea that human and chimp DNA overlap by 98 to 99% has been widely used to promote the idea that humans and chimps shared a common ancestor millions of years ago. But have you considered how they came up with this estimate? For starters, let's look at the size of each genome. While estimates of the exact size of our genome has varied over the years, the last count has it at 3.097 billion base pairs. But the chimp genome is much larger, at 3.231 billion. This means that chimps have at least 130 million more base pairs than we have.
Your graph there really isn't to scale now, is it? You portray it as if the chimp has so many more base pairs when in reality it's less than 5%. Alright, whatever. As scientists, we don't get deceived by poorly created graphs. No sir, definitely not. You know, here's the thing. Two species, no matter how related they are, aren't going to have the same amount of nucleotides. Heck, even individuals of the same species aren't going to have the same. Think of it this way. You and I, we differ in nucleotide count because there are many different types of mutations that could cause the number of base pairs to be dissimilar. I'm sure you've all heard in your high school biology classes about insertions and deletions, but there are plenty of other errors too, such as translocations and transpositions. Different populations already have a different number of nucleotides in their genome. As time passes and these two populations don't interact with each other anymore, the differences continue to build up, since mutations are passed to offspring. And then when thousands and millions of years go by, you can count these mutations. But it's faulty to assume that changes in specific base pairs is the only thing that would differ as time goes on, because we also have entire genomes being added, deleted, reversed, copied, etc. on top of single nucleotide changes. So as time passes, genome lengths will also differ, which is what happened between humans and chimps. So the question now is, how much of that length discrepancy can be attributed to steps of translocations, transpositions, insertions, or deletions? Say, for example, we had 10 translocations that is attributed to the length difference. That is very different than having 100 translocations to reach the same. Does that make sense?
So, how is it possible that our DNA is 98% similar to theirs when the chimp genome is actually 4.3% larger than ours? Right out of the gate, you can see there's something wrong with the sweeping 98% estimate that's frequently used.
Okay, we'll get to the actual explanation later after I let this creationist attempt to explain it first. But right now, I will say, yes, it does seem a little suspicious, doesn't it? And you know, when you come across a scientific concept that doesn't make sense, it's important to go out and figure out why that is the case. Why is it that 99% was reported when there's an entire 4% segment of DNA that chimps have and humans do not? My first impression, if looking at this from fresh eyes, would be to assume that scientists use some sort of measuring system that is well defined but not exactly intuitive at first. In science, there are plenty of instances of using scientific measuring methods or terminology that would need a bit of time to understand and is used specifically in the scientific community. And that is actually exactly what is happening here. There are plenty of examples of this. For example, many people, especially creationists, do not understand what the meaning of entropy is, and they think it's something similar to chaos, when in reality it is not and is much more specific. Same thing here. Percent similarity or percent identity is not what you normally would understand it as, and instead has a specific definition in bioinformatics which we will go over later.
They came up with this figure by cherry-picking only the sections of our DNA that overlapped with theirs.
You absolutely cannot call it cherry picking. It's common practice to have ground truth to compare with, because nucleotide by nucleotide comparison is straightforward and the algorithms like it, so it's easy to get a sense of differences. Large genome changes, not so much. But of course, it's not like we use percent similarity or identity as much as you'd think anyway. You think the only piece of evidence we have for chimp and human evolution are substitution mutations? Absolutely not. Our measuring systems take everything into consideration and we use multiple different scoring systems. Percent similarity is one of them. Percent identity is another. In fact, I would say that 99% similarity between humans and chimps is actually one of the last things we use to conclude ancestry and draw patterns of human evolution.
One of the things that not many people know about this study is that large sections of DNA from both the human and the chimp genome were left out when making this comparison. Let's see how Minute Earth, a secular training site that holds to an evolutionary perspective, describes it.
Okay, I'm not going to play this segment with Minute Earth's clip because I don't want to risk them giving me an automatic copyright claim, which many large channels do. Not saying Minute Earth does it, but I just don't want to take the risk and then edit my video again after it's been uploaded. But it is a good video, so I recommend checking it out. They're pretty good at explaining difficult scientific concepts in easy to understand terminology. That's honestly something I need to work on. But anyway, basically yes, there are plenty of segments that are excluded because they do not match each other on both the human and the chimp side. Percent similarity is only possible if we don't look at entire segments that appear in one organism and not in the other. Our algorithms that calculate this would count those as gaps. Let me briefly explain. There's a process called alignment in which you take one DNA and compare it to another. Now, we have multiple different alignment algorithms, but they are all quite robust. To compare entire genomes, you would want to use a global aligner, which does a better job at end-to-end comparisons and punishes gap extensions more heavily than gap existence. Anyway, when you do an alignment between human and chimp genomes, you get a result that includes a lot of different measuring factors. Percent similarity is one of them, and in case you don't know this already, and I realized I didn't explain this yet, percent similarity counts the exact nucleotide differences for those that align together. But a small note, it also rewards matches that produces the same amino acid product, whereas percent identity does not. But anyway, ultimately you want to look at the alignment as a whole to determine relationships. Just looking at percent similarity is often not very helpful when drawing a phylogenetic tree. So in other words, we present this percent similarity to the general public because it is easy to show and easy to present. But in the scientific community, it is just one out of many scoring systems used. And honestly, in my opinion, is pretty useless by itself, although it could give somewhat of an idea of species to species relationships. You have to look at the alignment as a whole to get the best picture. You can see this creationist is now purposely portraying percent similarity as if it is everything scientists use, but that is simply not the case and is the biggest flaw within the argument.
Ignoring 18% of the chimp genome and 25% of the human genome. That's a lot to ignore. In fact, this represents hundreds of millions in each side of the comparison.
Honestly, it's not even that much to ignore. If you compare the human genome to other species that are less related, chances are you will find much greater differences in length. But of course, you can't just look at length to determine ancestry because evolution can both add and delete nucleotides at any point in time. So that can throw a lot of things off. That's why we have these algorithms that look for patterns and from them determine the change. For example, let's say we have one segment of DNA from humans, but that one segment appears twice in chimps. Minute Earth says that this is ambiguous as to if we should count this as thousands of changes equal to the number of base pairs or just one change. But I think it is pretty clear. It is one change because it is caused by one mechanism. So going back to the example, if we see this again, but say in another organism and has this segment repeated 3 times, then that is 2 changes. Algorithms have to be smart enough to recognize things like this and determine a proper scoring system. Obviously, this is much more difficult than counting single nucleotide mutations, but it is necessary. We also can't create algorithms that are biased towards a certain standard compared to another, which is why this is so challenging. But getting back to the point, just saying there are length differences does not undermine the relatedness between 2 species, because large changes in genomes can easily occur. 25% of the genome sounds like a lot until you consider the fact that this could have been done by just a handful of translocations.
Could the sections they left out be responsible for coding most of the obvious differences we see between humans and chimps? It certainly makes sense that just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different 2 creatures are.
Yeah, I can see why Minute Earth included that in their explanation, but I didn't find it to be too useful in proving their point. Yes, just counting mutations itself is not useful when considering phenotype differences. Large amounts of differences could account for tiny changes, while single nucleotide changes could contribute to great differences. But in terms of determining evolution ancestry, that doesn't really matter. Mutations will generally happen at the same rate, no matter if these changes affect phenotypes at all. So just looking at DNA itself and not its impact on the organism is technically enough.
Indeed, human DNA and gene-level comparisons are frequently made to other mammals, such as mice, cows, and even dogs with high levels of overlap. And we are obviously quite different from these animals.
No, we're actually a lot more similar than you'd think. Yeah, maybe some people would look at these organisms compared to humans and think we are incredibly dissimilar, but that's because you fail to take into account many of the basic things we take for granted that should also be counted. For example, the composition of cells, organs, systems, the fact that we have eyes, a vocal cord, things like that which you wouldn't really consider unless you took a big step back and thought about it. And if you accumulate everything together, you'll realize we're actually so similar to dogs and other mammals.
The fact is, the human and chimp genomes code for 2 completely different creatures. While both are mammals based on scientific criteria, God made man in His image and gave him a soul that is eternal. Chimps, which are soulless tree-dwelling animals, and humans, which are eternal souls wrapped in bodies that have vastly different capabilities than all animals.
I always thought the Christian view of humans is so narcissistic. Yeah, I guess humans are great, but seriously, in objective standards, we're not any better than other animals. We just evolved differently, with a focus on developing intelligence. If humans didn't have our brains, we'd get absolutely wrecked by other animals, let's be honest. It always cringes me a little when creationists say humans are designed specially and has a soul, whereas animals do not. It's kind of like that one friend that brags about himself too much. You're not that special.
Being made in the image of God and charged with taking care over God's creation would mean that humans would have several distinctions from chimps. Let's take a look at just some of them. First, humans are the only living thing on the planet that has a conscience and a sense of morality.
That is wrong. There are plenty of animals that show morality, ethics, and a general care for each other. Okay, I'm not going to get into the rest of the video because it's no longer talking about the DNA topic we were so interested in. So yeah, I shall end the video here. I guess the moral of this video is, you're not special. Except me, of course. I'm pretty special.